Today's sermon is going to require a little bit of assistance from 10 of you. You don't have to say anything, but I'm going to need you to stand up in front of everybody. So I'm going to come out and pick you out of the audience. I don't even know who I'm going to pick yet. But if I come to you and you don't want to do it, just shake your head and I'll move on to somebody else. So don't worry about it. Bible is a big book. You've probably noticed that. And if you work hard enough, you can prove pretty much anything you want out of it. You can find something somewhere to do that. The Bible has been used over the centuries to approve of all kinds of things, of war against another country, of slavery, and certainly of the oppression of certain peoples, most significantly of women. It is a message you can find in the Bible if you look for it. Now, we talk about the Bible as being inspired by God, so why would these messages be in there? And the answer is yes, the people that wrote the Bible were inspired, but they were also children of their times. They accepted the values of their times that were standard, just like we all do today. And when they wrote, those values came through despite the fact that they were receiving God's light as they wrote. One of the interesting things about the Bible is that the usual idea that women are somehow less than men, the common idea in that time, is never found in Jesus' words. He never does that. He never seems to find other people as of less value than others. He never gives into that idea that was so prevalent in his time. The woman that we read about just now in the 8th chapter of John is a good example of that, of Jesus' attitude being different than the sexist attitudes of his age. And I'm going to take a brief look at her interaction with Jesus and with several other people who are connected to Jesus. So, first of all, I'm going to bring up my adulteress. Karen? The trapped woman. So, we don't really know much about who this person is, who this woman is. We just know that, there are those, I'm sorry, Karen, but there are those who say she was probably a prostitute, but we don't know. We do know that they brought her to Jesus because she'd had committed adultery, and they dragged her to Jesus for judgment. Adultery almost always requires two people, so it's significant that they only brought the woman to Jesus, but that's what they did. They brought this woman up to Jesus, and they did this on purpose. Because the law of Moses, the law that was regarded by the people of that time as the supreme law, did say that people who commit adultery should be stoned to death. In other words, they should have rocks thrown at them until they are killed. And that was the law at the time. And they brought this woman to Jesus because what they wanted to find out was, will Jesus hold to his law of compassion for others, or will he hold to the law of Moses, which everyone recognized as the law from God? Which one would Jesus choose? And they asked Jesus, and Jesus gave a brilliant answer. He just bent down and wrote on the ground. And they kept pressing him about this until he finally stood up and said, whoever has committed no sins, you throw the first stone. Nobody was willing to do that. We don't know what Jesus was writing on the ground, maybe something that pricked their conscience, we don't know. But whatever it was, for one reason or another, the people dropped their stones and walked away. And the woman who had been trapped by them and tried to trap Jesus was left alone in the middle of the crowd. Jesus goes up to him and says, where are the people that condemned you? And she said, there isn't anyone. And he says, I don't condemn you either. Go in peace. Don't sin anymore, but go in peace. And that's what she did. She is one of the women that is connected with the life of Jesus, one of the stories of the life of Jesus that we've heard. And I'm going to have the trapped woman go up and take a seat in the choir loft. Just wait there a little bit. Because next has to come Nicodemus. Here, Nicodemus. Now, we also read Nicodemus' story, and Nicodemus is an expert in the law of Moses. He is someone who knows what he's talking about. He did his best to live a pure life, right, Nick?
Right.
Yes, okay. He was a member of the ruling council in Jerusalem. He was a man concerned with his appearances. He did not want to even appear to to have anything sinful about him. If he were to have walked down the street and met that woman over there coming the other way, well, he would have crossed the street. He wouldn't want any indication that he was somehow like her. We know he was concerned about what other people think, because when he came to visit Jesus, what time was it? Nighttime. He did not want to be seen. He didn't want to be seen by his colleagues who didn't approve of that. He came and then he had a conversation with Jesus that helped him to understand how Jesus could say that he had to be born from above as well as from earth. Now, Nick, I'll let you take your seat too if you can get up there. Now, Nicodemus, in his desire to be pure, would never have mixed with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus would have been considered to be a great sinner by Nicodemus, right? Right. Yes, because Zacchaeus was a tax collector, which meant that he worked for the ungodly Roman government. And that's what he did. And furthermore, he had a bit of a reputation of not really playing fair and honestly with the money that he collected. He got wealthy, but maybe at someone else's expense. So he was considered a traitor to his country, and he was considered somebody who just didn't seem to care much about the laws of God. And Jesus came to the town where Zacchaeus was, and the Bible tells us that Zacchaeus was not tall, but a short person. So what did you do, Zach, to see Jesus?
I climbed up in a tree, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
Oh,
you climbed a tree. You climbed a tree so you could see over the crowd. Because, let's face it, when he tried to get to the front of the crowd, where Jesus was passing by, the people of the town who knew who he was probably closed up ranks against him and maybe elbowed him a little bit in the nose. So he climbed a tree to see where Jesus was, and Jesus walked down the street followed by this big crowd of people, and he stopped right under the tree where Zacchaeus was, and he said, "Zacchaeus, come on down. I'm going to your house today for lunch." And Zacchaeus did come down and had an interaction with Jesus that seems to either have changed his life or changed the attitude of the people of the town towards Zacchaeus, because maybe he wasn't so bad as they thought. But Zacchaeus gave up any of his sinful ways. You need a sign, don't you? Here you are, in case you forget who you are. Yes, you must. So Zacchaeus went with Jesus, and it changed his life and maybe changed life in that town as well. Now, Jesus forgave Zacchaeus, but there were many in that crowd who would have condemned Zacchaeus instead, as they did the trapped woman over here. So go ahead, Zacchaeus, you can take your spot. Well, let's see, who's next? The stoners. I'm making no comments about this life, but she's one of the people that was prepared to throw rocks at the trapped woman. She's one of the ones that was going to do that. She would have also been happy to throw a few rocks at Zacchaeus as well, because she was pure and good. Most likely the people that wanted to stone this woman were pious and religious people. They looked down on the woman that they wanted to stone. They were full of self-righteousness. Let's see a little self-righteousness. There we go. And yet Jesus found a gentle way to make them look at themselves. When he was writing on the ground, you had to stop and think about that. So these stoners became some of the people that were circling around Jesus. Prior to that, you can go take your seat. Prior to that, the people who were willing to stone someone would have done their very best to avoid the sick woman. This woman had been suffering for a long time with a disease. She had an open wound that wouldn't heal. It caused her great pain, but the doctors were unable to help her, and she spent everything she had on trying to get help from them. This meant that she was considered impure, because an open wound would have made her impure according to the laws of Moses. The stoners would have had nothing to do with her. They would have avoided getting close enough to her to touch her. However, when she heard Jesus was coming to the town, she decided she had to get some help, She thought he might be able to help her. She determined if she could just touch the hem of his garment. She didn't want to touch this holy man because she herself was unholy. She could just touch the edge of his robe, maybe she would be healed. And she did do that. She pushed through the crowd. She touched the edge of his robe. Jesus felt that happen, looked at her, asked what that was all about, and then told her that her faith had healed her. He looked at this woman who would have been touched by no one else and touched her himself and said that she was healed. She was impure, but Jesus didn't care about that. Now, you can go on up. Her life was very different from someone else. She became poor because of her illness. But Joanna, where's Joanna? Joanna? How many of you know about the story of Joanna in the Bible? How many of you have heard? Only Rose. That's not surprising because it's only mentioned once. Joanna's only mentioned one time. But she's mentioned as someone, a wealthy woman who helped pay the expenses for Jesus and his disciples. That he traveled with her and took care of things. That she was someone who watched out for what people needed and the group needed in order to be able to carry out their ministry. And apparently she was with him for much of his time. And this must have brought her into contact with a great many people that her privileged life would normally have avoided. Like the sick woman. Where is she? There she is. Because as back then as now, wealth means health and poverty means illness. And because she was wealthy, she was able to remain healthy. The sick woman went broke trying to get well, as is so often the case. A wealthy woman like Joanna would never have come into contact with a sick woman like her, or even less with the lepers. Now, leprosy in the Bible is a word that is used, has been translated to cover a great many kinds of diseases, mostly skin diseases. And the problem with skin diseases is, again, that it leads to sometimes discharges that make you impure, so that you are no longer able to be part of the religious community, and because they tend to be contagious. And maybe it really was leprosy. But whoever was, if you got this illness, you were condemned to a life of isolation and poverty. There was no way that you could be with good people like this. You certainly wouldn't hang around with Joanna or with Nicodemus. But these two found their way to Jesus somehow. He healed lepers frequently, we're told in the Bible, touched them, went to them and touched them and healed them. Some of them came back and said thank you. There's a story where it says he healed 10 lepers, but only one of them came back and said thank you. And that person was a Samaritan, which means considered by other people to be a half-breed, less than human. And yet they came back and thanked Jesus. These lepers had a long road to get back to respectability, and it would have been a long time ever, have a seat, before they came into contact with someone like Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph, did you know Joanna? Well, I just thought because... Okay. Yeah, because you would have traveled in the same circles. You would have been members of the same country club, and you would have bought your clothes at the same exclusive shops and things like that, because you were a very wealthy man. Very wealthy, and that isolated him from the needs of the people like some of these others that are up here. He didn't have any contact with them. He was like Nicodemus. Where's Nick? You certainly know Nicodemus, because you were both on the council together, on the ruling council, so you served on that as well together. He was a good and honored citizen, included everywhere, just as the lepers had been excluded from everywhere. So his life was going pretty well. Go ahead and have a seat. But there is somebody who would have hated him. Simon, the Zealot, is someone who would have hated Joseph of Arimathea. Simon definitely believed that the time had come for violent revolution. As a zealot, he would have favored getting rid of Rome as violently as necessary. He was prepared to kill other people. He was, in our version today, a terrorist. He looks dangerous to me. he would have definitely opposed Joseph of Arimathea, who had found a way to make it in society when Simon felt that society needed to be completely overthrown. Somehow, nobody knows how this happened, this guy became a disciple of nonviolent Jesus. We never hear in the Bible whether Jesus talked to him about putting away his sword or his ideas. They just know that he was called Simon the Zealot for that. Simon would have been very wary around Samaritans like the lepers over here. He would have been very concerned about their influence in society. He would have been ready to take drastic action if it was necessary to keep things pure. And he had a tough day coming because Jesus insisted on spending time among the Samaritans. Going on. Yeah, I know. Okay, and one of the Samaritans was a woman that Jesus met at a well. And we don't know too much about her except for the fact that she had, are you ready?
A whole other.
5 husbands. Yeah. In fact, at one point she said, when Jesus said, go get your husband and bring him and I'll talk to you some more, she said, well, I don't have a husband. And Jesus says, well, that's right, because you had 5. And the man you're living with now is not your husband. Nicodemus, what do you think of that? Where are you, Nicodemus? Yeah. And yet, Jesus spent time talking with her. Simon, what do you think of that? Where are you, Simon? Yeah. How about you stoners? Yeah. I don't know how, this woman is not one of us. And yet Jesus spent considerable amount of time talking with her and then stayed in her hometown and talked with all of the people there. Every one of them, a Samaritan, every one of them looked down on by others. And yet somehow Jesus found, where is she? There she is. Jesus found something in her that needed to be brought close. So go on up. As a matter of fact, don't go up. Stand right here in the middle. And I'd like all of you to come and stand across a line. You can stretch all the way across if you need to. Yeah, make a single file so I want to see everybody. Okay, sure. Yeah. Take a picture. No, and this is my entire point, folks. How in the world could a group like this have come together? How in the world could they have come together? There's simply no way. There are people here who would have nothing to do with each. If you're standing next to somebody that you shouldn't be near, take a move. Go somewhere else. You'll never get it lined up. You'll never be able to pull this off because everybody's standing next to somebody that shouldn't be. Look at this. How in the world could this have happened? There's only one way this could possibly have happened. What do all of these people have in common?
Jesus.
Jesus.
Hey, Texas.
Every one of these, Jesus saw as a good catch. This is one of the ones I want. And there's no way that they would have ever come together on their own. Now, so here we are in racially non-diverse Maine. And your first glance might be that these people are all the same. But I want you to look at these people and ask yourself this question. How in the world could this group of people ever have come together? What is the only thing that they have in common?
Jesus.
Jesus. Jesus is at the center of our life here as a church, and that is what has brought them together. And there's no way otherwise that this particular group of people would have ever spent any time with each other, much less let me stand up in front of everyone else and let me make jokes about it. Here they are together because God has called us. And see that person sitting near you? That's another case of someone who God called and are here because of that. Thank you, my 11 participants. You can come on down.
Yeah.
Often there are wars in our society, in our world. There are wars that take place because people think that there isn't enough stuff to go around. There's not enough land, there's not enough resources, whatever it is, there isn't enough to go around, and we get into conflicts with each other, and we have a war. And we also find that there are people who believe that there is a shortage of love in this world, that there is no way that there is enough for all of us. And so we dribble it out. We hand it out gently to people that we think will deserve it, but we're unwilling to give it to some of these others that have been called. The world then finds that people believe there is a shortage of love in the world, but there isn't. There isn't. Because all of those folks were loved by God and recognized by Jesus as God's beloved ones, as are all of us, as are all of those people in the world. The 5 that were shot in Illinois, and the one who shot them, all beloved by God, every one of them. Some of us did not get enough love from our human life, but we all know that we are filled with God's love, that is who we are, beloved people. And if we live as if we are beloved, we begin to recognize other people who are beloved as well, so that perhaps we can reach out and form a community made up of all kinds of people who are loved by God and willing to give that love in return. Amen? Amen. Amen.
You've been listening to a sermon by Reverend Stephen Carnahan, pastor of High Street Congregational Church in Auburn, Maine. If you feel inspired by what you hear, you're invited to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning, starting at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to Steve's sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC, where you'll find the video version of Steve's sermons as well. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day. May God's blessings rest upon you now and always. See you next week.